On August 12, 2017, a neo-Nazi deliberately drove his car into a crowd of left-wing protesters in Charlottesville, Virginia, killing a 32-year-old woman called Heather Heyer and injuring 35 others. America and the rest of the world were on a knife edge. The victims were assembled to counter the Unite the Right rally, a demonstration against the proposed removal of a statue of Robert E. Lee, a Confederate general. And the attack acted as a climax to the nation's increasing polarization and paranoia about President Trump's links with the so-called alt-right. At a press conference in the immediate aftermath, President Trump made a series of incendiary comments, including saying that there were very fine people on both sides. Like many, I was horrified and outraged by the fact that instead of trying to bring calm, Trump chose to further inflame a highly volatile situation. But not nearly as horrified and outraged as I was when I later discovered that this was all an elaborate, orchestrated media hoax. In actual fact, at that very press conference, President Trump made it clear that his comments were describing peaceful protesters who opposed the removal of the statue, saying, "I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and white nationalists because they should be condemned totally." But the media cut his comments out of context and ran headline after headline claiming he was defending the very people he'd just condemned. To this day, millions of people believe this lie. Last week, I saw it again here in Britain, when the Labour Party clipped comments by Matt Goodwin, Reform's candidate in the upcoming Gorton and Denton by-election, out of context to claim he'd criticised Manchester when he was in fact criticising the Conservative Party conference, which had been held in Manchester. This time the media didn't have to lie. Our politicians did it for them. These dirty tricks are sadly part of the ugly game of politics. More troublingly, they are now increasingly spreading to the arena of public debate more broadly. During my appearance on Question Time last week, the usually decent Labour Minister Douglas Alexander tried to pull a similar move on me. Unable to respond to my criticism of his government's failure on immigration and the attempt to demonize millions of normal British people who dared to notice that failure, he instead tried to suggest that I'm a bigot. "You said Rishi Sunak isn't English because he's a brown Hindu," was his retort. This is a skillful lie on several levels, the purpose of which was to deflect attention away from his and his party's failings. Here's how it works. First, he deliberately concealed from the viewer that my comments were made in a discussion of the difference between British and English identity, so that it looks like I was saying Rishi Sunak doesn't belong in Britain. That's not what I was saying. Second, he failed to mention that in that very same conversation, I explained that my son, born to two immigrant parents like Sunak, is also, in my view, not English. No matter how evil Douglas Alexander thinks I am, even he could hardly accuse me of being racist against my own children. Third, he failed to mention that Fraser Nelson, the journalist with whom we were having the debate, wrote an article afterwards describing my view, with which he disagrees, as a perfectly fair point. Fourth, he failed to mention that Fraser was the one that brought up Rishi Sunak, not me. I don't go around discussing who's English and who isn't. And fifth, finally, and most importantly, he didn't mention that prior to being elected, Rishi Sunak described himself as British Indian, saying, "British Indian is what I tick on the census. We have a category for it. I am thoroughly British. This is my home and my country. But my religious and cultural heritage is Indian. My wife is Indian." These 5 steps is how you go from two people having a reasonable discussion about their views of what it means to be English and British to pretending that one of them is evil. Even if you disagree with what I said or thought I didn't articulate my point well, this is dishonest framing. Why do they do this? Because it's easier than addressing the arguments I'm making. On Question Time, I made 2 basic points. One is that net zero is industrial suicide, which has destroyed our economy and produced zero growth since 2008. The second is that both Labour and Conservative governments have imported more people into Britain over their respective terms and power than had come between 1066 and 1950. Can they deny this? No. Can they dispute the facts? No. So all they have are the smears and the insults. Over the last few days, there's been an attempt by a few non-entities on social media to have me banned from further Question Time appearances. These people still think it's 2016 when these tactics worked. Let me explain something to you. You've had the monopoly on the microphone for a long time, and it's made you lazy, and it's made you arrogant. More than 2 million people now watch and listen to TRIGGERnometry. 100,000 read my Substack every week. Our show is part of a massive ecosystem of alternative media, which is the reason the legacy media is dying. You can keep trying to cancel people from the conversation to maintain your echo chamber. But even if you succeed, all that will achieve is driving more people into our arms. If you really hate my views and what I stand for, there's only one thing you can do. Make better arguments. Good luck. You're going to need it. One final thing. A lot of people on social media over the last few days have called me a grifter, and because of that, I'd just like to remind you can find my work at www.konstantinkisin.com and of course TRIGGERnometry at triggerpod.co.uk. Most people think they're informed. In reality, they're selectively informed. Modern media doesn't just tell stories. It quietly decides which ones you never hear about at all. That's why I use Ground News. It's the only app that compares how the same story is covered across the political spectrum and show you what whole audiences are not being told. The blind spot feed is one of my favorite features. Every day, it flags upwards of 20 stories that are being ignored either by the left or the right. Follow along at ground.news/triggernometry. Take this story. A major US poll found that Republican voters' confidence in Trump's economic leadership has dropped sharply during his second term. That is not a minor data point. If you only read right-leaning publications, you would have missed this completely. On the other hand, look at this. The UAE drops UK from scholarship list over radicalization concerns on university campuses. That's a significant story. Yet, coverage from left-leaning outlets was almost non-existent. Ground News puts all of this in one place. Headlines, bias breakdowns, ownership, and context. So you can actually understand what's going on, not just react to what you're told. Go to ground.news/triggernometry to get 40% off their unlimited Vantage plan, the same one we use, and stop being managed by the media.